G'day fixers. Now that my tool storage area is pretty much done, it's time to turn our attention to this crappy old bench. It is literally one of the first things that I ever built, but its time has come. Its replacement is going to be made primarily of these scabbed bed slats, as usual here in the Fixit Fingers workshop, and as usual trying to find the straight ones is pretty hard. I knocked up a design in SketchUp. It's going to be a frame made out of bed slats and a top salvaged from an old IKEA desk, bit of trim around the side, a few dog holes, and of course some Kreg hardware for the clamping track and the clamp vise. Workshop projects means rough and ready construction. The legs are going to be two parts, two of these bed slats, each one of them cut slightly shorter than the other, in order to give me a bit of a faux half lap joint so that the top frame has something strong to rest on. That's how my little joint's going to come together. So I've got all four legs here, and I do have to make a cheeky little checkout using the actual piece of material to mark it to the correct size, setting the circular saw to depth, and Chopper Chris is going to get a bit of a workout today. Many passes, and then bash it out with a hammer. Bit of crude old chisel work until we get the nice fit for what will be the top of the frame. At least I know I can cut square. They're standing by themselves. That's what the legs are going to look like. I've only given everything a very, very rough sand here. It is workshop furniture. Bit of the old type on with the Dana Super Spreader. And because I don't have enough clamps and am too lazy, these screws are simply to peg the stuff together until it's all dried up. While those legs dry, time to work on the top box frame. Couldn't use a stop box for the long pieces, so I had to reference them off each other. And in the little side braces, we're going to use pocket hole construction here primarily. I am loving the auto adjust function on my new Kreg jig. Now you can use the fancy corner clamps to make your life fairly easy when assembling these large frames. But if you don't have them, a little corner square such as this one will get you out of trouble. That's the middle brace going in. Legs are all dried, ready to roll. We can mark out where, again, we're going to use a couple of pocket holes to attach these to the top frame. Pulling the block off the old K5, still coming in handy. My little portable drilling solution here is going to put them in the right spot. On the back I had to get even more creative and manually lay them out. Whenever you need to do this, make sure you do a test piece first. This crack opened up a little bit due to the bent nature of the bed slats. Using a card to force the glue into the joint and the clamp got me out of trouble. I love this style of joinery because it is just so darn quick to put together. Positioning the legs, screwing the pocket holes, and then on that piece at the back it just gets a regular old screw. Not too heavy yet, but very stable so far. Right now all I'm going to do here is pretty much replicate that top frame down the bottom, but the one at the back needed to have a little bit ripped off. So I'm setting up my thin ripping jig here and doing the old clamp dance. Like my clamp podcast clamp. Grant made that for me. Nice. So the long section goes down the back. You will note that the frame is only on three sides. I want it open at the front so that I'll be able to roll, hopefully, a smaller workbench underneath in the future. I could have put the pocket holes on the bottom so you couldn't see them, but I couldn't be bothered. Much easier doing it this way. Bed slats are never really flat, so using the clamp to pull them together, trusting that the wood is the correct length. One more brace in the back, and my frame is pretty much done. Time to go, little old workbench. You served me well, but you were a piece of crap. This one, much more stable. Now, you'll see throughout the rest of this build, the workbench wobbles like no tomorrow, and that is because these casters are rubbish. Now, they were $10 from Audi, so I shouldn't really complain. They're just not suitable for what I'm doing here. I think I'm going to get some of those drop-down casters eventually, but for the rest of the build, the stability is compromised by these crappy little wheels. Right, time to get on the top. Here are these reclaimed benches that I found on the side of the road. Chopper Chris and my AccuCut, making short work of cutting out a nice rectangle appropriate for the size of my bench. Now I will point out here, this is not the best way to do this. Because of the limitations of my garage, I have made my work surface the same size as my frame to get the most stability. For the clamping track you're going to see in a short moment, having an overhang is actually much easier for your installation. But this is the way I chose to do it. So that's the sub layer, simply screwed on in. Then we consult the instructions, because these measurements are critical. You can see the purple texture down the side where I've marked where my bolts are going to go. And again, due to the size of my garage, I've had to trim down one of the tracks. Now these things are super solid, but they are still only aluminium. So your regular woodworking blade, if you take it nice and slow, can cut through. Stabilo blade is awesome. Such a clean cut. Don't worry, that offcut will not go to waste. An awful lot of marking out to be careful with here to position where my holes need to go through. And using an awl is a very good idea with the melamine, so your drill bit doesn't slip around everywhere. Need to take the sub base off for just a moment. Try to avoid some blowout by putting a board underneath. These holes are for the bolts that will anchor the clamping track to that sub base. Now, because I don't have an overhang, I need to take an extra step here. And I need to mark out using my lovely 2x4 new marking knife. Check out Stabby McStabface there, it's awesome. Then I grab my Forstner bit and put a little recess in so those bolt heads will have somewhere to live. I then realised that when the track goes down, I won't be able to screw the top back to the frame, so I had to plug in a couple of pocket holes on the outside. Again, you could put them on the inside, but I just couldn't be bothered. Here's another problem I created myself. The instructions say to use 3/4 or 19mm stock for these tracks, and if you do, your life will be easy. Because I'm using reclaimed materials for the desktop, I needed to take a router and rebate out 1mm because it was 18, so that when I put my top on, it clears the track just a little bit. Now, melamine is an absolute mongrel to try and route. Chip outs absolutely everywhere. I minimise it as much as I could. The good news is this is the sub base, so you won't really see them. But a bit of chisel work on the end will give me at least a respectable sort of fit. Using the offcut as a straight edge to route out that same longer channel on the other side. And the tedious process of installing all of the bolts from underneath. However, once they're done, it's pretty fun to slide this in. Go on, get in there. Now, don't tighten these up all the way. You're going to want to check square in just a second. Plop, 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 plop. In goes the long bit. Then we grab the big framing square. Hold everything nice and steady, and then tighten down those bolts. So those bolt heads will now fit into the little counterbores that I did earlier. And check out the right-hand side there, you'll notice where I have screwed in my offcut. Now, this is giving me an extra anchor point, however, it will also cause me a little problem in a moment. Here's a quick demo of how you can use the bench. You don't have to put the extra top on, you can use this square corner to be a reference point. Slide in your bench clamp, and obviously designed to really help with your pocket hole construction, but I don't want to do that. The Automax will adjust to different heights super quick. Now I want to be able to slide pieces over the whole workbench. So I've got a second one of the benches, which you'll believe it or not, I also managed to get off the side of the road. And here I'm using the jigsaw to quickly cut out that recess for the offcut. So again, an extra little step. I am overcomplicating things as usual. Blue tape helps to stop the chip out as I use the router and a bit of a straight edge underneath the board that you can't see to make that the correct size. So when I drop down at my top, it fits on there. Also note the slight little finger hole to allow the clamp to go in on the small piece. No fancy joinery for the top, it's melamine, it's not going to move. Just getting underneath and banging in a whole bunch of screws around the edge. Now I made that top a tiny bit oversized compared to the sub base, so I could come back and do this. Flush trim bit, blue tape, it cut a lot better than I thought it was going to, and that gives me a beautiful surface to screw in the edge trim. More bed slats. Already the clamping bench is coming in handy for building the clamping bench. You know, the old staples. And look, these miters aren't going to be perfect. I'm just rough cutting them on the miter saw. It's pretty darn accurate, good enough for this. Here's a nifty trick. I wanted to use these bed slats, but they weren't long enough to go down the long edge. So, cut a 45, bang your pocket holes in for 19mm as usual. Line them up carefully using your new clamping bench. Smack the screws in, and you have effectively, very neatly extended one bed slat into two bed slats. Now I want to keep that in the middle, so when I trim these down to the correct length, I took equal amounts off either end. Here's a good tip. Using another offcut, I can line that up to the exact height that I want these trim pieces to sit. Use the mark out tool to find out where the screws need to go in. And then mark, drill, countersink with the lovely countersink bits and secure the trim to the side. Once I had the two end pieces on, I can use those as a reference and slowly sneak up on a good enough fit for the long side pieces. To hide my dodgy miters, grab a screwdriver and run the side of it, folding over the little soft pine edge. It'll cover most sins. Time for some more hardware. This is the Kreg Clamp Vise, and I'm going to use it instead of a traditional vise. I need to rebate out a little bit of this piece, so just marking it out there using the vise itself. Then over to the router table. Didn't need a flush trim bit, just the way I had it set up. And making that channel a little bit longer than it needs to be so that again the clamps can get in at the side. This has to be the easiest vise to install in the world. It's simply two more screws. Drill those out, sink them in carefully. Because they require quite a bit of torque, I like to finish them off with the screwdriver. Then you've got those T-channels there where you can clamp in very securely. Do you like my new mallet? Vando's Woodshop. Oh yeah, it's nice. Now I don't want it sitting out like this though, I want to make it flush, so we're just going to take that off another time. Mark it out with Savvy McSabface. Use the plate itself to set the desired depth on the router. And then hog away most of the material. When I got close to the edge, the Japanese pull saw comes out, cut that down to length, and my Vando mallet does a nice job of cleaning away the waste. I almost feel like a woodworker. More chisel work than I've done in 6 months on this project. And there's the final install on the vise. Quick demo, now it's flush, I can hold long pieces, flush up against my workbench. Now this was going to be a little bit tricky. I needed some dog holes, except that while most of your Kreg stuff will come in metric, this one has 19mm 3/4 inch dogs, which means I need 19mm 3/4 inch holes, and I only have a 20mm Forstner bit. However, I do have a 19mm spade bit. These things are nasty inaccurate, so if I drill through from the top with a 3mm guide, then underneath the bench, use the 19mm spade to start a hole, I can clear out most of the waste from the top with a 13mm drill bit, the biggest one my drill will take, and that's just big enough for a 12mm flush trim router bit to go into that drill hole and use the 19mm spade hole as a guide. And I know that sounded really complicated, but it worked brilliantly. If you had a 3/4 inch Forstner bit, you could of course just come in straight from the top and then clean the edges up like I'm doing here with a tiny little roundover. The big reveal with the tape, and we're just about done. Now those dogs did fit in very nice, and here's a demo of how you can use the vise. Obviously how we saw before, you can put it that way. Automax adjusts to the width that way. Or you pop in your dogs, and you can use those to hold too. Kevin the Sander, he can come out and do the whole top now. Move your dog to the appropriate place, and your big sheets can be done as well. Bit of freehand routing, put a straight edge on there to cut a dado, whatever you need to do, it's going to be awesome. Well, that's it guys, this has been a most satisfying build. I have had a huge amount of fun doing it. If you are looking for plans, I will put a link in the description below so you can build one too. And if you're after the hardware, there are of course the Carbotech affiliate links for people in Australia and Amazon links for the folks overseas where you can pick up all of your necessary Kreg hardware. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you're into Kreg gear like I am, then check the playlist coming up on your screen now. It'll show you a whole bunch of tool reviews and projects based on the blue stuff. Catch you soon.